The aura that these fighters have. You know, you may be beaten before you get into the ring.
The Eastern European has become the dominant, shall we call it, species in boxing.
I would say it's a phenomenon from the Ukraine.
Таранька — это в пресной воде.
Egis has got the best stable of fighters, I think, out there.
The Eastern European fighter is still a new entity in professional boxing. Up until 1990, Eastern Europeans were not turning professional because there was communism and they were not allowed to turn professional. And even after communism fell, many of these Eastern Europeans, because of the culture, many of them were not turning pro still.
Советский спортсмен-победитель предолимпийской недели в Мехико. Но сейчас Баранников не сумел противостоять натиску грозного соперника.
The amateur boxing program in the Eastern European countries is spectacular. It's wonderful, and that's why they've been able to produce so many great professional fighters.
The Soviet bloc was a major force in the Olympic Games overall because the Olympic Games are for amateur athletes.
In early 90s, in Ukraine, people would never see the difference between amateur boxing and professional boxing. Kliczkos were the pioneers. When Vladimir became the Olympic champion in 1996 in Atlanta, himself and his brother Vitaly, they signed a promotional contract with Universum Box Promotion in Germany. It was something new for our country. And now, professional boxing is the #1 sport in Ukraine.
When you're selling an Eastern European fighter to the world in terms of his profile, once they gain Olympic gold, it's a lot easier to do that. Because I think if Loma and Usyk hadn't have won major medals, it starts to become a little bit harder. So that was a big moment for their profile.
A lot of these guys, to this day, still don't know how to properly turn pro. You know, there's so much talent over in Eastern Europe. I know what it's like to be a young fighter and have a dream. And if you don't have those doors open for you, you know, it could get tricky and it could be very frustrating, you know? So for those fighters to have somebody like Egis to open doors for them and to have them get this huge notoriety as professionals the way they would deserve, it's not something that's done very easily.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you would, put your hands together. One of the most powerful managers in boxing, he manages Wasylowi Łomaczence, Alexander Usyk, and of course, Sergey Kovalev. Please welcome the 2018 Boxing Writers Manager of the Year, Egisa Klimasa.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Los Angeles.
Managers come in all shapes and sizes. They do different things. Some guys call themselves a manager and collect a fee and don't do anything. And then there are managers like Egis who, you know, live and die with their fighters, who really do get involved in whatever needs to be taken care of, who oversee their training, who take care of whatever the problem is at the moment. Egis is a great manager.
He knows what's achievable because he knows both sides of the coin. So he bats his corner for the fighters, but also he understands the market, the model, the broadcasters, the industry. I think that's what fighters like from a manager. They want someone that can navigate their career, but they also want someone that's emotionally invested.
When I met Egis, I immediately realized that he was a serious person. It doesn't take rocket science to be a good manager. You have to be diligent, you have to care about your fighters, and Egis is all of that. Egis is about business, but business with a heart.
The relationship with him, even he's a manager, like relation from me and him, I consider him as a friend. And I always like appreciate that friendship and like respect from him and from me to him is just, yeah, something special.
Wow, do you think we have time?
That's what I was saying, yeah. So maybe we can get through this stuff at least.
Well, basically, you know, I was born in Lithuania. I wouldn't say I was very poor. I grew up with a poor family. It wasn't a poor family. Unfortunately, I lost my father in a car accident when I was 5 years old. My mom got remarried, and we were 3 kids in the family. I was 21 years old when my mom died. Back in the day in the Soviet Union, not too many people were very healthy. A week later, I joined the Russian army in engineering departments, battalions. It was 1989, summertime. I ran in one of my colleagues who was already preparing the documents to leave Lithuania and go somewhere abroad. I didn't fought much, you know, like a week or two, and I made the decision, okay, I'm going. So I started preparing all the documents, all the paperwork. It took me like maybe 2-3 months, and I got the permission to leave. They took my passport away, so I was a citizen of nobody's, nowhere. So I had no citizenship. I had only one piece of paper with my picture on it, and was like, I believe, 3 visas. So when I came to Austria, you know, when you're already in that environment, so you know, you're talking to people. So I heard from somebody what there is a IRC, International Rescue Committee. They said, okay, we have an interview at the United States Embassy. After that, I was granted to be a political refugee. That's how I ended up, 1989, end of November, Seattle. No friends, no family, English. Oh, I knew how to say I'm hungry, just in case. I had $42 in my pocket at that time. And I remember as today, on the way from the airport, you come up to the hill, and then you see the downtown of Seattle. All those lights, and I saw all that downtown. I felt myself about like this big. All those skyscrapers, and I gave to myself a question like, Egis, what you doing here? What are you doing here? And at that moment, if somebody would say you can close your eyes and you open back home in Kaunas, I probably would do it.
Where he came from originally to get to the place where he is one of the biggest power brokers in this sport. You don't see that all that often.
Boxing was my passion. I used to box. I used to have a few amateur fights, and then I came to the States. Of course, I was following. My first bout I saw live, 1992, Riddick Bowe, Evander Holyfield. I bought $800 ticket and I went to see a match. I think it was crazy. It was probably like the last money I had on my checking book. Beginning of 2000, I went to New York City. It was a heavy night. Only heavyweight was that night on a card. And next morning somehow, hotel or cafe, I don't remember, you know, I was sitting at a table, and the next table was sitting Don Turner, who was a Holyfield's trainer at that time, and I kind of like, And he was like, "Oh, kiddo, what are you looking at?" I said, I recognize you, you're a Holfin's trainer. And he says, yeah. So and he goes like, "Sit down, let's talk about it." And for me, it was like, wow, something else. And I just sit down with him to have a cup of coffee, and all of a sudden, 4 hours later, all we've been talking about boxing. And then he gave me his phone number, but he was like, "I know you guys have a lot of good fighters back in Russia, Ukraine, Lithuania, and if you ever think about bringing anybody, I have a good training camp in North Carolina. I can train your fighters." That's how my boxing journey started.
I think a lot of American fighters simply would not have the mentality to look at Oxnard as being luxurious. And if you take a look at Egisa Klimasa and his crew at Boxing Lab, they probably look at Oxnard in a certain way, and I think that's a big key, is that having the ability to be disciplined.
Boxing laboratory, I would say it's an international boxing gym. If you even walk into the gym, you will see a bunch of flags. It means somebody from that country was in the gym training or still in the gym training. Sometimes when I think about that, some countries are fighting in between. But these guys, when they come to boxing laboratory, they live like brothers.
These fighters who went to the Olympics together and now are in the professional game, and now they're world champions at the same time. And I'm talking about cruiserweight Usyk, light heavyweight Vosdik, and Łomaczenki in lightweight.
Sometimes fighters go through weight divisions and they become world champions, but there's different world titles, so you're not always the top guy in your weight class. But I think you can safely say that Łomaczenki has been the best champion in every weight class he's been to.
Wasylowi Łomaczence is the best technical fighter since I promoted in the mid-60s Muhammad Ali.
Oleksandrowi Usyk completely dominated the cruiserweight division, now makes his step up to the heavyweight division. He is going to be a real force to be reckoned with, and I think he has the ability to do what he's done in the cruiserweight division into the heavyweight division.
But these guys come from a system where the amateur programs are excellent, far better than ours, and they are just better fighters. They come here and they can compete at the highest level with anybody we have.
If you believe in the fighter and you believe the kid has great talent, then you want to test him and have him fight the best that he can fight, and that will make him into more than just the ordinary good fighter. It'll make him into a star. And Egis recognizes it.
He has a certain mindset that I'm going to bring you here to fight, but we're not going to babysit you for 30 fights. Almost baptism by fire. And I think he takes pride in that.
You want to have an aggressive approach to your career, but you also want to have an intelligent approach to your career. You also want to understand who you have and who you don't have, With Łomaczenki, they were very aggressive. This is possibly the best amateur that ever existed on the planet. In his second pro fight, seemed to make a lot of sense, but you see what happened, he got beat. So you take the aggressive approach and it can be successful, and when it's successful, it looks genius. But you also risk putting in guys a little bit too early sometimes, and some of those guys wind up taking a step back at times. We saw Maxim Dadashev actually passed away.
Dadashev came to this country with a dream, just to make a better life for him and his young child, and to see that evaporate so quickly and so tragically. And, I go back to that fight, and Dadashev rallied in rounds 8, 9, and 10. It gave you just enough hope, where I thought Buddy McGirt was very justified in actually letting the fight continue. But then after the 11th, you saw the dam burst. In the aftermath of that, it goes to show you, boxing is literally the riskiest sport on earth.
Some guys risking their lives. Some people die in the ring. I have experience of that. I've seen my guys knocking other guys out, which is died 3-4 days later, which was in coma for 3-4 weeks. My guy, Maxim Dadashev, died in the ring. They come here, they don't know what is waiting for them here. They just like playing a lottery. You can't come here and live life you lived back home.
I came here, I feel like on a different planet, you know, it's a different world completely. Try to observe everything, to discover everything, so it was really interesting.
There was this perception that fighters from that part of the world, the Eastern Soviet bloc, were all Ivan Drago, that they're all mechanical, very stiff, they did not have a personality, and that they were not marketable. And I remember watching some of these guys, thinking to myself, these guys are okay, but I don't think they'll ever really fit into the professional world of boxing, at least not in America. And for any of these guys to have the commercial success that they've had, beginning with, I believe, is the first wave. It is Kovalev, Gennady Golovkin, Ruslan Provodnikov, and Lomachenko. To me, that's the Mount Rushmore. That's the first wave of guys that, to me, will always be looked upon as a certain marker in time when the business became more global.
Initially, there was a rejection from that Eastern European wave of fighters, from broadcasters and probably promoters. You're bringing in a guy that has really that doesn't resonate with that audience, coming into the US. Some of them don't speak English that well, but because of their quality, because of their ability, they couldn't really be ignored, and I think that that's the reason that we've seen that invasion, because of how good those fighters are. I think the big test for Usyk is going to be how he handles big, fast guys who punch very, very hard. But let's not forget that in the World Series of Boxing, throughout his amateur days, he boxed a lot of heavyweights. So he's used to bigger guys. He can adapt to all styles, and now he's in, commercially the biggest division in the world.
He can say a lot by not saying anything. Just his facial expressions, his body movements. As he likes to say, he's very feel. He's one of these quirky characters. There's almost like a mystery about him.
I think that character cannot be properly quantified or properly measured as a talent, but it is a talent.
There's just this mystery about these guys that like that sort of magician style. They're going to put a spell on you during the fight, and a lot of times they do. Language has no barrier for magic and entertainment. He doesn't have to talk. He can pull faces. He can do tricks. He's a genius, a crazy Ukrainian genius.
Do you want me to read the questions? Or you
it's easier, I can just talk and then you repeat.
Yeah. Let's do it like that.
That's why I'm here, it's like a secret for you, that's easy. No, but it's okay, I'm gonna sit here.
Alexander Usyk, the younger brother of Jim Carrey. I heard, of course, about Alexander when he was amateur, because I was, in the boxing and, Olympic medalist. And then I did that thing with Lomachenko bringing team here to the United States. All of a sudden, I saw on the list Alexander Usyk is coming. So, oh, cool, 2 in 1. But before I take a fighter under my wing and start carrying him into the career. I do my homework, you know, I look at it. For me, it's very important, not just the talent. Talent, of course, is very good, but if it's going to be a good talent and a bad person, the talent is nothing. Because one day you can lose it. Everything.
Это замечательное место, это территория моего старшего друга. Первый раз я сюда попал в 2018 году. Да? Мы готовились в Москву к Мурату Гасеву на финал Али-трофи. И вот здесь такое какое-то намоленное место на победы, тут закрытая территория, здесь никого кроме нас нет. Здесь ходят прекрасные животные, лошади, здесь плавают замечательные рыбы.
Подготовка, в принципе, начиналась, как обычно, за 3 месяца. И очень много проделано работы, как по переходу из тяжелого веса в супертяжелый. Александр постепенно, шаг за шагом подходил к этому этапу, и на сегодняшний день он уже вошел в супертяжелый вес. Он чувствует себя там уверенно и как у себя дома.
I think Usyk, when you look at him, his frame is probably bigger than Holyfield's frame was, you know, so I think he can fill into a legitimate heavyweight a bit better than maybe most past cruiserweights. Usyk was a big cruiserweight, you know, a lot of times you get some of these cruiserweights, you don't know how they're making the weight, you know, but I think Usyk also has the talent and the schooling and the pedigree to handle a lot of the heavyweight division.
His skill set and his athleticism, you know he has advantages in that. Then the other factors that we do not know yet in terms of those variables are strength and power, and then how does he carry that size?
When somebody talks to me about Usyk cannot punch, I always say, ask Tony Bellew.
I was absolutely exhausted after 7 rounds of being in the ring with him, and I was exhausted because he made me exhausted. He physically wasn't as imposing as I thought, but mentally exhausted me.
It's the pressure they use by closing the distance and being in range, being out of range, being around the side of you. It's kind of like the mental decapitation that they let evolve over the distance of the fight.
I believe Alexander Usyk is the greatest cruiserweight that there's ever been, purely because he's done something that no other cruiserweight in history has done. He has completely wiped out a whole division. He has taken every single belt in doing so, and then once he has all the belts, he then defends them again against the guy who everybody says that only has a chance of beating him. So he's unbelievable. I can't credit him enough. He is an unbelievably gifted fighter.
In Ukraine, right now, you have at least 3 guys that you can look up to and say, I want to be like Usyk, I want to be like Loma. If you don't have that, it doesn't inspire that younger generation. You can't, as a young man or young woman, want to get into a sport if you don't have heroes, if you don't have role models.
Меня зовут Вова. Мне 14 лет. Я родился в Киеве. В Украине куча разных красивых городов. В Украине Нет, в Киеве куча хороших друзей.
Ноги поставим в положение против стойки. И делаем просто скачок вперед, скачок назад. Больше ничего не делаем. Только ноги на ваши ноги.
The Eastern European sort of group of fighters that are coming through, it's the same as we said with Łomaczenko, Usyk. You know, they've had such a great amateur schooling and they've come through. I think what they've done prior to turning professional has given them the grounding to come through and really dominate their divisions within the sport.
Первая тренировка мне понравилась, то, что была драка, то, что мы дрались с ребятами, то, что я выплеснул какую-то свою энергию, которая была внутри 15-летнего подростка. И вот я думаю, что я спустя где-то 2-3 месяца, может быть полгода, я полюбил этот вид спорта очень сильно. Я точно помню, что первые 2-3 года я не пропускал ни одной тренировки, ни по каким причинам, ни по болезням, вообще абсолютно ни по каким причинам я не пропускал тренировки.
На олимпийскую или... Нет, я хочу стать таким же самым, как Kliczko, или же, например, как Усик. Мне нравится, как они всех побеждают, как они... Мне нравится, как они всех вводят в аут, например, так, пух, и победа. Я хочу так же самое. Я поэтому тренируюсь. У них очень хорошая выдержка.
Я мечтал стать для начала чемпионом Крыма. Потом я мечтал стать чемпионом Украины. Потом я хотел поехать на чемпионат Европы. Потом я хотел поехать на чемпионат мира. Следующие мысли были о Олимпиаде. Но ничего не бывает, если ты просто будешь мечтать, это останется твоей мечтой, но к этой мечте надо прикладывать усилия, надо жертвовать собой, надо жертвовать временем, которое кто-то проводит на море или где-то еще в каком-то месте, а ты проводишь в зале.
Михаил Завьялов, президент Национальной лиги профессионального бокса Украины. Олимпийских играх это был Мюнхен, Монреаль и Москва. Это, где я был тренером сборной команды Советского Союза. Ну вот, посмотрите, после развала Советского Союза на Олимпийских играх все время доминирующее положение занимают боксеры из бывшего Советского Союза. Россия, Украина, Казахстан, Узбекистан. Это все, очень у нас была и есть очень сильная школа бокса.
Usyk, he is the pride of Ukrainian nation. He became the Olympic champion, and as soon as he was announced the winner in the fight, he performed a national Ukrainian dance, gopak. His haircut was also Ukrainian traditional long hair of Cossack style. So he attracted so much attention from the public. So people started to recognize him because he was different.
Вы знаете, Александр боксировал во всемирной суперсерии много лет назад. И у него там получилось очень неплохо разобраться с на то время топ-проспектами супертяжелого веса. Там был и чемпион мира, и призер мира, и тот же там он боксировал с Джойсом. Ну, тогда он весил, при весе тогда 95-94 килограмма, он, грубо говоря, в каких-то боях он их даже и не чувствовал. По идее, насколько помню, Александра всегда была цель и мечта завоевать все пояса в супертяжелом весе. Мы, собственно, поддерживаем все его цели и мечты.
That World Boxing Super Series, I think, is something that he should cherish forever, because he went into that tournament as a highly decorated amateur who had a championship belt, came out of that tournament 3 fights later as the undisputed cruiserweight champion of the world, and he hit the free agent market and struck gold with Eddie Hearn in the zone, and now he's a fighter that is very, very relevant.
Well, I think, you know, as a fighter, he's arguably one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world right now. Moving to heavyweight is a big challenge because the guys are much bigger. You know, he doesn't have the physical strengths that he'd have at cruiserweight, but he does have the technical strengths, and that will be something that never goes away.
It's an exciting time for the heavyweight division. Usyk is up there with all those guys, and he will take on any of them. And I believe, you know, he'll give all of them a very, very, very tough test. And you could see a new heavyweight champion of the world there. His view then will be to go and become the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Something, again, that hasn't been done in a long time. And to do that in 2 weight divisions, it's unheard of.
Usyk is a tremendous fighter. You look at Evander Holyfield, who started as a light heavyweight, worked his way to cruiserweight, and then became heavyweight champion. Now the heavyweights are a little bigger, but Usyk is a pretty big guy, so I think he will have a lot of success in the heavyweight division.
He's actually a naturally sized heavyweight, but he's not of the modern day ilk. The guys today are giants, they're superhuman freaks, and they are huge. Compare them to the heavyweights of yesteryear. People like to touch on the likes of Evander Holyfield once upon a time going from cruiserweight to heavyweight. That does not work in this modern day purely because they are facing giants.
You know, I love what I've seen out of Usyk, the cruiserweight. I have no idea what Usyk is as a heavyweight. He just hasn't really impressed me up until this point. I mean, the Witherspoon fight felt like he was just shaking the rust off in that fight. The fight against Derek Chisora, he won clean, no question about it, but that had as much to do with Derek Chisora fading late than Usyk turning on the gas.
Очень сильно не понимает вообще, что происходит в ринге, как это, ну, насколько это нелегко или наоборот легко. То есть у людей просто складывается вот такой вот образ, который они додумывают. То, что я отбоксировал с Дереком 12 раундов, ну, это на самом деле очень непростой парень. Если посмотреть там, поединки, Тайсон Фьюри отбоксировал с ним 12 раундов.
Derek is a fighter who wears you out. Derek is a fighter who tires you and drains you through leaning on you, using his weight as the advantage. AJ is completely different. AJ uses speed and explosiveness to get to you.
Да, я считаю, что на данный момент это лучший оппонент. Он вообще великолепный спортсмен. Он хорошо сложен, он высокий, он олимпийский чемпион, он чемпион мира по 3 версиям. Он выигрывал замечательных ребят. Это очень сильный дядька, известный всему миру.
It's always a problem going into fights for AJ, the stamina issue, purely because he's so muscle-based. But it's all about the game plan that he employs, less about the weight and the size. At some point in the fight, if he's to do what he needs to do, the size will become a factor. Not so much the weight, but the size. There is a difference there. The size is what's going to be imposed on Alexander Usyk.
The heavyweight doesn't mean it has to be big. Even Joshua not is a very big heavyweight. So it depends, you know. And Usyk, his footwork, his speed, his movement, it's unbelievable. I think he will do a lot of damage in the heavyweight division.
Я думаю, выиграет все-таки, наверное, Усик.
А почему?
Мне кажется, он как будто больше его, больше, чем он способен.
Мнение сперва такое, что 50 на 50. Конечно, я буду болеть и желать все, чтобы выиграл наш Усик. Он имеет все возможности.
The thing with Alexander Usyk is he's so quick to adapt to what these guys do. That's going to be the question on the night. Can AJ adapt to Usyk, nor can Usyk adapt to AJ?
Мы верим только в победу Александра Усика и верим в то, что привезем пояса в Киев, в Украину, домой, где, по идее, место.
Так вот, путь осилит идущий. Тот, кто идет, тот, кто не останавливается, тот, кто проходит все преграды перед достижением цели. Есть много преград, есть много стопов, которые хотят тебя остановить, есть какие-то сомнения, есть неуверенность, есть критика, есть много советчиков, которые говорят: «Эй, стой, хватит, ты не дойдешь». Так вот, не надо останавливаться, надо просто топать и все, идти, улыбаться, пританцовывать и топать. Вот она и означает.
Казак, это вот как пошли от Запорожской сечи. Это сильный, умный, бесстрашный и готовый отдать все для своей родины.
Полем і дивиться. О, яке гарне поле. І парить, отак от, і отак от парить над Січчю Запорожця. Hey Anthony, I send you hello. You very good boxer. You superstar.